My name is Chet Kennedy. I am one of the student ministries pastors here at FAC. I am speaking today to Dr. Marlis Kruger. She is the clinical director at the Family Psychology Place here in Calgary. She is a psychologist with over 30 years of experience, and she attends church here at FAC. Welcome, Dr. Kruger.
Hi, Chet. Thanks for having me again. It's nice to talk with you and meet you.
Perfect, thank you. So what, in your experience, has parenting in a pandemic been like for families that you work with?
Well, I would say that right now, most of our families are feeling pretty tired. So the words that we're hearing people use would be overwhelmed, tired, burned out, and in all ways, emotionally and physically. So it's been pretty difficult. I think a lot of families at this point are in survival mode, right? We're in this and just get through it. For a lot of parents, that means putting their kids' needs first, and they sort of take the brunt of that then. So that's had some implications for parent mental health. But of course, kids are feeling all of these same things. Families have been under such prolonged stress now, with so many difficulties going on and so many changes, so much to adjust to, so much uncertainty, and so many different areas of stress as well. Well, a lot of families have had responsibilities put on them for everything, so they're now fulfilling all roles for their kids. They're not only the parent, but they're also the teacher, they're the friend, they're a therapist, they're a tutor, they're a sports coach. They're doing everything. They're having to say no more than they did before because everyone is home more. There's less interaction with other people. There's more things they have to say no about. Some of which is just part of parenting, but some of which relates to all the new circumstances that we're in. And there's a lot of loss that we've had in many areas, but some of the losses that are particularly difficult for families are the losses that relate to kids, right? They've lost their social contacts, or they've gone in and out of them. They've lost their extracurricular activities. The families have lost some of the typical activities that they would do to cope. And then the parents themselves have lost the usual outlets that they would use to cope. So we have all these stressors while the responsibilities have gone up, while we've all lost those coping tools and those other outlets and relationships and supports that we have. And these things have been hard even for the families that are typical or high functioning with lots of supports and lots of resources. Even these families are finding it very difficult. So I know even our psychologists here, who certainly have lots of tools at their disposal, they're finding things really difficult as well. And then we just know that difficulty goes up as a family has more challenges or has fewer resources. So if there's a child that has some sort of condition that just makes things more complicated, like ADHD or autism spectrum, we're noticing that that's become a real complicator. Or if there's fewer resources, that normally they would have had someone coming into the home to help, maybe with some sort of funding that now they're not able to do, that all of a sudden they really lost resources. Or before they would be able to get family members to help, and now they haven't been able to for a long period of time. So that is it's hard for all families, of course, but then those things are particularly hard for families with extra challenges or fewer resources. Definitely one thing that we've seen is that parents are trying to put their kids first. There's so much that they're trying to do for the kids, and that is at the expense of their mental health. So we are seeing increases in those symptoms of anxiety and depression, but we're actually seeing increases in actual diagnoses of clinical conditions of different anxiety disorders and different types of depressive disorders. We're seeing that in kids as well, but we're certainly seeing that in parents too. we're seeing a lot of mom guilt. So not that dads don't feel guilty, but moms have a special relationship with guilt. So there is some research out showing that women are bearing the brunt of some of the effects of COVID on the family and on their employment and opportunities in the work world. And we certainly see that as well. So moms are feeling guilty, like they're not being good enough parents, they're not doing enough. Even if they have no responsibility for what their kids are struggling with, they still take on that responsibility. And basically they have, parents in general just have too many responsibilities right now without the resources to meet everyone's needs. And because moms typically have that bigger caretaking role in most families, or feel that caretaking responsibility more so than dads do, they just have that higher guilt for not meeting everyone's needs within the family. We're seeing strain on marriages for sure, like we would in most difficult times. And then a lot of families are really describing big emotions in their kids. So a lot of kids who before maybe had a bit of a sensitive temperament just by personality are now maybe developing anxiety disorders. Kids who always had a bit of a propensity toward getting upset are now far more upset or losing it more often. So lots of big emotions we're seeing in kids and hearing about in families as well.
Yeah, one of the things that you've mentioned to us before is that a huge area for kids in their development is emotional regulation. Can you explain what that is? And is that at all related to these bigger emotions that we're seeing?
Yeah, that's a good question. Emotional regulation it's kind of a catchphrase now, and it's basically just a fancy term for all the things that we do to manage our emotions. So it's understanding our emotions, being aware of our emotions, being able to name our emotions, being able to know how we're affected by things, being able to know how we're affecting other people, and then being able to cope with our emotions. So how do we deal with them? How do we move through them in ways that aren't harmful to ourselves or harmful to others? How do we problem solve around it? So even afterward, how do we kind of look at, well, what were our triggers? What can I do next time? So emotional regulation is really the phrase that we put on learning to manage our emotions. And it really is a skill. So it's something that we all need to learn. It's easier for some people to learn those skills than it is for other people to learn those skills. So just like some kids need extra help learning to read, some kids need extra help learning to manage their emotions. For some it comes naturally, for some it doesn't. For some it will always be harder. So we're really looking at, we have to be able to name our emotions. And to do that, we have to have that cognitive understanding of what our emotions are, and also that emotional awareness of how those emotions feel for us. And then second big area, we have to be able to feel it, not avoid it, not get distracted from it, but actually feel the emotion and be able to move through it and regulate it. So how do we cope with that emotion in a way that brings down the intensity so that we're managing it? And then we have to manage all our behaviors around our emotions. So what are our behaviors within that whole emotional context? So there's a lot to emotional regulation, but it basically means managing our emotions. And it is a really important skill that we're learning right from infancy through our lives. So even as young babies, you think about how the baby cries and we pick them up and we hold them close. That's called co-regulation. What we're actually doing is teaching them to regulate their emotions by kind of soothing them and regulating them ourselves. So we hold them close and they hear our gentle voices and they feel our heartbeat and they feel our warmth, and it soothes their own sensory system. And then as they get older, parents are responsible for teaching kids to do that in just more difficult ways. Sometimes still those ways, but certainly in much more complicated ways.
Is there a parenting style for helping kids to learn or to develop emotional regulation?
Well, it's something we're working on right from day one with kids. So that co-regulation is something core to child raising. It's one of the most important things that we bring to the table as parents is our ability to have warmth within like some boundaries and some structure, and teach our kids how to cope with emotions. So in that very physical, direct co-regulation way when they're younger, but then as they get older, that we're modeling emotional regulation ourselves, and that we're actually teaching them how to regulate their own emotions. And so I'll take you through a little bit of what that means. But to do these things, I'll back up one step. To be able to help kids manage their own emotions or regulate their own emotions and deal with all of these stressors and emotions that they're going through right now, parents have to have their own strong emotional regulation skills. And we know that we're not perfect as parents. Some of us have had our own traumas that affect our ability to manage our emotions. Some of us have our own conditions, whether it's anxiety disorders or ADHD or addictions, that affect our emotional regulation skills. Some of us have, just even if they don't have clinical names, just their own stressors in life, relationship problems and work stressors or fear about job or financial concerns. And these things all affect our own ability to regulate our emotions as well. So a parent being able to manage their own emotion sort of sets the stage for everything that we have to do to help our kids manage their emotions, which is part of why that tendency to put ourselves last as parents and put our kids first, trying to meet all of their needs. It's why sometimes that can get us into trouble, that it leaves us not being able to, I guess, take care of ourselves in ways that then we can be there for our kids by responding rather than reacting in ways that are helping them with emotional regulation. So there's I would say there's two things that are really important in terms of some of the parenting tools to be using. One would be that we are, even from a very young age, in appropriate ways for someone that age, that we are modeling emotional regulation skills to our kids that are healthy and appropriate. So that within that, we're naturalizing emotions, and we are kind of verbalizing about the coping strategies that we're using to deal with them. So we're labeling the emotion, we're naming it, and we're showing as we talk through how are we coping with this, but all in a way that's child friendly with good boundaries. So an example would be if you're driving around with your kids and you get lost, to say things like, oh man, this is really frustrating. I got lost. Now I'm worried I'm going to be late. And then to kind of go through, to within that, you're modeling, what am I thinking to keep myself calm, right? This isn't, you can be like, what are we going to do? They're going to be so mad at me, and completely lose your temper and your patience and start to cry, which is probably not modeling the most effective emotional regulation skills. But you can also go, good thing that we left a couple minutes of extra time to find our way again. We'll only be a couple minutes late. These things happen. Let me pull out my phone and see if we can figure it out. Thanks for staying quiet in the back seat so that mom can find the way to the appointment. And oh, look at that, I stayed calm and that helped me find my way find my way here. But that we're actually modeling, I feel frustrated, here's what I'm doing to keep my thinking in check, and that you're actually verbalizing some of that, and then modeling some of that positive, I guess, healthy thinking that is teaching them how to deal with the emotions in those helpful ways. We're not minimizing, we're not saying it's not happening, I'm going to pretend I'm not late. But yes, I am running late, I am lost, we are going to be late for the appointment, but here's how we're keeping that in check. So modeling that emotional regulation on our own by naming our emotions, showing them our thought processes, and letting them hear some of the ways we work through that is really healthy, as long as we're doing it with proper boundaries. So say if we have a situation where two parents are upset with each other, that's not where we would say, I'm really mad at your dad. He never remembers to do things. It makes me feel such and such that this is not the time to be modeling how we're dealing with that. We want to do it in appropriate ways that show boundaries, kid-friendly language, but that we're teaching them through that. And then when our kids have these big emotions, because that all is emotional dysregulation, when we see these big emotions that are out of proportion to a situation, that are harmful to the child, that are harmful or hurtful to someone else, those are times of emotional dysregulation. And in those, as parents, our job is to respond rather than react, and in that to guide them and co-regulate with them. So there's a couple things that need to happen to set the stage here. One is we have to be able to engage in a place of calmness. If we come to that scene with our own big emotions, we're just going to amplify and intensify everything, and we know that's not going to end well. Now, we've all done it, but it's one of those proud parenting moments, I'll call them, that we try to avoid them. So we have to be able to come to the table calmly to engage without our big emotions. Our next job is to try to connect emotionally. It's not to problem solve. It's not to make everything quiet. It's to connect emotionally, because it's only in that then we can help the child soothe and engage their thinking and problem solving rather than just the high emotions that are there. So first we have to connect and soothe within that. Our next job is to help them name the emotion, help them identify what they're feeling, and to feel it, to help them feel it, not try to make it all go away, not try to just reassure them that there's nothing to worry about, there's nothing to be upset about, but to actually feel the emotion and go through it while we're I guess we're helping them go through it, giving them some strategies to bring it down, whether it's deep breaths or a back rub or something like that. These things change as kids get older, obviously, but we're really guiding them through the feeling in ways that are soothing them, but they can also be learning to soothe and calm themselves without avoiding the emotion, without just distracting them from how they're really feeling, and without excessively reassuring them to just make it all go away. And after that is when we can then do our problem solving, right? To deal with some of the issues that came up during that. So if people were hurt, if mean things were said, that now it's the problem solving about now what do we do about that? Or if it's like, okay, now let's deal with the situation that led to this. So yes, the toy broke. So now let's problem solve around what can we do with that. So it's that. Those are just some of the specific parenting tools that we would be doing as we're helping our kids with emotional regulation. But those depend on us having our own skills, and we have to have that warmth in our general relationships with our kids, and we also have to be maintaining those boundaries and have structure. So the most the most helpful, I guess, parenting style within this is one that's characterized by high warmth, but also high structure as well. So not a coldness, not a go to your room, right? A warmth, a co-regulation, but also a lot of structure around it. Not that because they were upset, there's no consequences, or because we know that this is going to set them off, we don't have those expectations. We still need to have all those pieces as well. That's a lengthy answer, I know, about our parenting style to help our kids learn to regulate, but
I appreciate it. It actually reminded me of two kind of strategies. The first one would come from the airlines, just simply get your own oxygen mask on before you're trying to help your child. And that would be that whole idea of regulating yourself as a parent before we try to regulate a child. And then the other thing what I was reminded of, and I don't recall the name of the study, but last year in one of the books I was reading, they were talking about a study looking at human beings, even though there are 30 to 40 different emotional responses, most human beings can identify 3 to 5 on the face of a human being. So it's that strategy alone, the idea of naming an emotion and working through that emotion and understanding that one emotion comes after another emotion, comes after another emotion. That strategy to me, I think would be absolutely golden for parents, specifically at this point, to recognize that there is an end to this emotion. There is a place where we can come to calmness and find peace in that. Let me throw another question at you. What happens when a student doesn't learn emotional regulation?
well, I guess we would say that, or I would say that probably a lot of difficulties that kids have, that teens have, and even adults have, they come back to not having good emotional regulation skills. So if you think about anxiety and depression, it comes down to that awareness of our thoughts and behaviors and being able to manage all of those emotions. If we look at difficulty in our social relationships, it's that awareness of ourselves and that awareness of other people and the ability to adjust our behavior accordingly within that. A lot of our behaviors when we have trouble with emotional regulation can become habitual. We just get used to doing it that way. And as we've done that for years and years and years, we just get very entrenched ways of dealing with anger or dealing with people who frustrate us or dealing with things that we find stressful. And those can, at best just be problem behaviors in different aspects of our life, but at worst, really start to characterize the way that our personality has gelled over decades, such that we can have not just clinical diagnoses of the more typical depression, anxiety, but of actual personality disorders where we have real disruption in our employment and our relationships and our own well-being and perceptions and thought processes. So emotional regulation difficulties can cause not just short-term issues, but some real serious long-term, or they're part of various serious long-term problems. Even in the short term, we know that when people are struggling with emotional regulation, that the likelihood of them being able to learn something goes down. So their learning is going to be compromised. We know that their confidence will go down, their self-esteem will go down, the quality of relationships goes down, their well-being goes down. The intensity of their emotions go up, and that's very tiring on people. Problems in general that they're having in life will go up. The things they define as problems are bigger. So this is where you get kids coming home and it was just a terrible day, when really one thing happened because their emotions are so intense all day. All of a sudden now their definition of what their day has been like changes. So emotional regulation difficulties really start to creep into many areas of life. We get behaviors like self-harm because the emotion is just too much to deal with. We get some of our issues with addiction because we have to figure out how to escape from our emotions. We turn to avoidance of major things in life that we just have to do because we have to avoid anything that triggers emotions. So there really is no end to, I guess, some of the challenges that we can face when we're struggling with development of those emotional regulation skills. And it is a skill. It is something that's difficult. It's something that doesn't come easily to anyone. Everyone goes through those phases when you're young of crying and temper tantrums and so forth as we're acquiring those skills. And some kids find it harder than others to develop those emotional regulation skills. Anyone with any sort of clinical condition, so anyone with an anxiety disorder, anyone with depression, anyone with ADHD, autism spectrum, a learning disability, emotional regulation is always going to be more difficult for people within those groups. Anyone with just a more sensitive temperament is going to feel emotions more readily, and then have them stick around for longer and have them be more intense than for other people. So some of us just have personalities that will find it more difficult as well. But it is a skill. It is something that we can learn. It's something that we really have to learn. And parents aren't in this alone. Just like some families need to get help in reading, for example, some of them need to get help to acquire these emotional regulation tools and strategies. And that's okay. There's no judgment in that. It's not the emotions that are bad. We need to feel all of these things, and we will feel all of these things. We just need to learn healthy ways of coping with them, that we're moving through them, we're keeping that intensity, I guess, low if we can, and we're coming through it in healthy ways for ourselves and the people around us. I like to think of it like a thermostat sometimes, that our emotions, it's like we want to be able to picture them on a thermostat. So we want to know, where is the thermostat? We have to be able to move it in different directions. And we need to be able to do that. We need actual tools to know, how am I going to bring that down, or how am I going to bring that up? And so we can give kids kind of a toolbox in how do we do that, and give parents that toolbox as well if they're struggling with this. Perfect.
Well, I want to thank you for your time. Is there anything else you wanted to share with us?
I'll share a couple what I call parenting pitfalls, if I could. And so these come from, I guess, a lot of experience over the decades, and literally tens and thousands of people that I've worked with. And so these would be a couple pitfalls that I see that can sometimes take families to a place that they didn't want to go to, that they wake up over here with a bigger problem than they want to have. So I'm going to share a couple of those things with you. So one would be, I use that word reassurance, we don't want to excessively reassure our kids. And that is a parenting pitfall, that in our best intentions to make them feel better, we're actually creating a bit of a bubble world for them, rather than helping them learn how to manage difficult circumstances or difficult emotions. So while it's okay to reassure your kids, if you're always having to reassure them, or there's nothing to be worried about, there's nothing to be stressed about, it's all going to be okay. If you're frequently doing those things, that would be a sign that you're giving excessive reassurance, which is highly connected to development of anxiety disorders in kids. And then the other would be the tendency that we have as parents to minimize a problem, downplay it, or even ignore it. And so if you as a parent find yourself saying things like, I used to be like that and I turned out okay. They'll turn out okay too. Or it's just because of COVID, because it's so difficult, I'm sure it'll go back to normal after. Or it's just because he's a boy, it's just because she's a girl. It's just because they're approaching puberty and that's why all of this is happening. Those are all kind of warning phrases that usually are associated with some degree of minimizing or ignoring. And then the other phrase would, or the other thought would be, if you're always seeing things as improving in your child, and yet if you step back objectively and look at them compared to other people your age, and there's still a problem, that yes, they're improving in their emotional regulation skills, but there's still difficulty. They're still losing their temper more than other kids, or having more trouble getting along, or having more difficulty dealing with frustration at home or in the classroom. If that stands out for the age group, or someone's pointing it out to you or mentioning it to you, even though they're improving, there's still something there that needs to be looked at. So those would be the parenting pitfalls that I would be watching for in parents.
I think those are brilliant strategies. So if anyone would like to get in touch with you, how can they do that?
Oh, they can just get in touch. The Family Psychology Place, 403-250-7792, familypsychologyplace.com. I believe the pastors at the church have our number. If you just Google us or Google me by name, something will show up. We do have as well a Facebook page that we try to put just helpful little strategies on pretty regularly. So you're welcome to follow us on that as well.
Perfect. Well, thank you so very much for speaking with us today. And I hope that we can all get out of these lockdown situations soon enough and start meeting more in person. Thank you so very much.
You're very welcome, Chet. Bye-bye.